think they were aggressive as hell. I think they were tough, and I think they bought up a lot of smaller companies. I think that, you know, everybody talks about the ingenuity of Gates and Microsoft, but I think a lot of that, their cutting edge technology and their leadership in software, and forgive me, Miles, if I'm wrong about this, but I think they bought a lot of it. They bought a lot of startups, and they bought a lot of that technology. And again, that's what makes me say Bill Gates was a better businessman than he was computer software guy.
Okay.
But of course, you got to be very smart to know who to buy and when to buy them. And you know, when you hitch your wagon to the IBM PC horse, that's a pretty smart move, obviously. Back in the early days, which I think that he probably was a guy who was quite demanding 20 years ago of his employees. I know too, for example, that at one point, people who were working, if I remember this right, there were a number of people who were contract employees, not employees of Microsoft, but contracted by Microsoft to work for them. They took Microsoft to court saying, hey, we work full-time over there. Essentially, we are Microsoft employees. And I think the court found, and they were litigating over benefits. And so Bill Gates, with all his money, was trying to avoid paying for health care. So, I mean, he's saving money. So again, quite an aggressive view.
He really was the primary, I mean, he was very much involved in every aspect. Though he might not have been running every section, he was very aware of what was happening with the people who were running those individual groups. I think that after he left, I won't say that other people did a poor job of that, but just that the same conviction wasn't there that he had. And I really think that was the biggest thing that changed, is they went into a lot of different directions with the Xbox and game stations and antivirus and web browsers and operating systems, and they really did sprawl. They got wide. They got really wide instead of narrow. When you think about where they started out, there was the DOS operating system, and everybody wrote software for that. And then Windows became wider and wider and wider, and included encryption and virus protection and then browsers. And so to say, the organization started out kind of focused on just a few things, and then became focused on so many. So I don't know how you wrap that up into an organizational culture, but I guess you'd say it's entropy. It went from a state of order to a state of disorder. I think Microsoft struggled with that over the years.
It's not on the questions, but I'm just curious that I just had a presentation about Steve Ballmer, and what do you think about him?
He had some massive shoes to fill. I think that Bill Gates was a pioneer. He was tricky. He was hard to nail down. I think that some of the things that Microsoft did over the years were questionable, but they stayed out of trouble. And I think he just had a very, very, very large set of shoes to fill. And I think he did okay, but I'm sure in a lot of people's eyes he was a failure. But the company certainly didn't move in and wasn't as successful as it was when it was being led by Bill Gates. That's for sure.
So there were a lot of different cultures during that time. It was certainly a technology-driven company, and lots of innovation. Bill Gates was, to a great degree, the dreamer, the person who created the vision, and he brought very talented people on board with him to make that vision work. Very demanding culture, very rapidly growing. Being able to manage the growth by itself is quite a feat. But at the same time, being a very technology innovation-driven company, and with and managing that growth, those are the spectacular results. The organization, though, was a divisional organization, so that he had created these silos. You had the Windows silo, you had the Microsoft Office silo, and then you had other smaller silos, and there was not any cooperation between the silos. There was, in fact, he created competition between the silos, which was one of the problems that Steve Ballmer had to undo, and had to fix that problem when Steve Ballmer became the CEO.
And what do you know about his leadership style per se? So
who's his? Bill Gates?
Mm-hmm. Bill Gates now. So
he was a tyrant.
How was he like?
He was a tyrant, very demanding. He brought good people in. In order to turn over responsibility, they had to be with him a long time, that he could trust them. And Microsoft was his baby, right? You don't just hand your baby
Right.
over to somebody that you don't trust. It takes a long time for Bill Gates to become trustful. I mean, he didn't get married. Microsoft was his whole life. He didn't have any sort of outside social life of any consequence until he got married, I guess, sometime in early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. I mean, he was probably close to 40 years old when he got married.
That says a lot.
Yeah, well, Microsoft was his entire life.
Mm.